Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. What makes an athlete successful? We'll find out today from our guests, Noel Brick and Scott Douglas, authors of The Genius of Athletes. Noel and Scott, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
We're going to have fun, and hopefully the real test is if you make me a better athlete, because I'm kind of in that worst category. So anything you can do to help me is going to be impressive. Now, I've gone through your book, and you say top athletes have a unique way of taking stock of a situation. They talk to themselves, and they think about it. But what does this do, and can it be transferred to not me being so bad, but the average athlete, the varsity player in high school, the weekend tennis player, etc.?
Yeah, first of all, the quick answer to that is yes. The longer answer to that is, so in the book, we explore a lot of the mental strategies that athletes use and have learned to use to cope with, whether it's performing under pressure, whether it's building confidence, staying focused in the moment. And as you mentioned, Bill, talking to themselves through sometimes really tough and challenging situations. And I think those are all things that we all experience in our everyday lives, whether we're recreational sports people or whether it's in our working lives. We all encounter difficult situations that we have to try to manage. We all encounter emotions that we have to try to manage in some way. So whether staying calm under pressure. And so a lot of these skills and tools and techniques that we write about in the book that successful athletes use are transferable to all those situations as well. And I think one of our goals in terms of writing the book was really exploring these techniques. And I hope presenting them in a way that people can learn from and can apply to their own lives, whatever the situation might be.
So you've just given me new hope, is what you're saying.
I hope so.
All right. And I'm glad to hear that, because I definitely need it.
If I could add, I mean, I think
Sure.
an important point to make off the top is that, as Noel said, these are skills. These aren't necessarily things that you either have or don't have. They're skills that we can all work on and get better at. And that, when we talk about top athletes having these skills, they themselves developed those skills over time through hours and hours of practice. They weren't just born with these abilities, these strong mental abilities. So to me, that's really encouraging for anybody, because it's something that we can all learn and continue to get better at, regardless of how physically adept we might be at a sport or in a different other part of our life.
And I think that's good news for all of us, because I'm sure there's some other people out there like me, and at least there's hope, and we love that word, hope, that we can get somewhere. Now, Do these techniques, I'm just wondering, do they favor any group, younger people, male, female, any subcategory?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, in my research, I've worked with and I've interviewed male athletes, female athletes. And a lot of the techniques and tools that we talk about in the book come from male and female athletes. And Scott interviewed a lot of individuals for this book as well. And I think, going back to what Scott said, these are not tools and techniques that athletes were born with. And so therefore there's no genetic advantage here. Let's say, for example, they're very simple strategies, to a certain extent, very learnable strategies that anyone can use, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of experience. They're something we can all learn from and benefit from.
And I would add, I think I wish that I, as a younger athlete, had access to sort of being taught some of these skills, because I think that I could have, when I was at my physical peak, performed even better by having better control of my emotions, by having better thinking skills during difficult times. I'm a runner, during challenging times and races when I sort of wanted to ease back my effort or even quit. So while anybody can benefit, I would think that if you were able to start learning these skills earlier in your athletic career, then that would be great. Of course, it's better to learn them at any age rather than not to learn them.
And if I'm correct from my reading of the book, these are also techniques and, I guess, plans that anybody could adopt, and we can use this in other areas of our life. So it's not, while it might be focused on athletes for the purpose of the book, these are techniques we could use to become a better salesperson, a better teacher, or a better lawyer if we're out there in the work world.
Absolutely. The reason that we focus on top athletes is they consistently perform up to their abilities in high pressure situations. In their world, that happens to be the world of athletics. But that can be academics, that can be business. Yeah, it's really that was one of our main goals in the book, is to show that athletes have these, through hours and hours and hours of practice, they have honed these skills, and that they can use them in the rest of their lives. We have interviews with several people, including like a guy who was an Olympic runner in the 1990s, and he's now a vice president with Vanguard, the investment firm, and he attributes his success in business to the same tools that he used to become an Olympian on the track. One of my motivations for writing the book was to sort of came from the realization that almost everything I've achieved in my professional life came from the sort of skills that I eventually picked up through my many years of running. So yeah, definitely. We definitely want to make the point that this is not just for athletes. This is for everybody. It happens to be world-class athletes who are especially adept at these skills and applying them to challenging situations.
And I think we've had people on over the years who've said, people in companies who hire and said they actually look for athletes because they're competitive, and for certain jobs, obviously, because they're competitive, they're focused, they can direct their energies to work for a period of time and to succeed, and they know what it takes because they've been there and they've done that. Exactly.
Athletes succeed in part because they know how to set the right types of goals, and then they know how to go about achieving them. And that, of course, is something that underlies success in business and academics too.
Now, you gave me a perfect lead-in, because my next question was about goals. We always hear a set of goals. So number one, is that correct? And what I'm seeing in your book, there's actually different types of goals. So can you kind of give us an insight into that?
Yeah. So some of the types of goals, which there are lots, but some of the types of goals that we talk about in the book broadly kind of start off with three main types. So we've got outcome goals, we've got process goals, outcome goals, performance goals, and process goals. And when I'm kind of talking about this with athletes, I usually present these as a pyramid, with outcome goals at the top, with performance goals in the middle, and with process goals holding it all up at the bottom. And the reason that I do that, so if you put a bit of context to each one of those, an outcome goal would be the end result of what you're trying to do. So for an athlete, that might be winning a competition. It might be finishing in the top 10. In a business context, it might be getting a sale, whatever the outcome that you're trying to achieve is. The performance goal that underpins that is the level of performance that you achieve. So again, for an athlete to win, a runner maybe needs to run in a certain time. A basketball player maybe needs to score a certain number of points to give, or the team needs to score a certain number of points to give themselves an opportunity to win. So the performance goal, performance level of performance helps us achieve the outcome goal. But what holds all those things up are our process goals. And the process goals are the strategies, the tools, the techniques that we use to help us achieve our best level of performance. And going back to one of the earlier questions you asked, Bill, all those kind of examples you were giving are all performance situations. An athlete is performing in a performance situation. My day job, I'm a lecturer, I teach. It's a performance situation. And a lot of the skills that we have help us perform equally well in those. So as a teacher, I've got to stay focused. I've got to stay relaxed. I've got to make clear decisions. And an athlete has to do all those same things. So the processes and the process goals are the things I do to help me maybe achieve those skills and to achieve a level of performance where I can get the outcome that I want. The other reason that I usually present that as a pyramid is that, and this maybe leads on to something else, but very often we kind of look at a performance situation from the top down. So we look at the outcome first. And we look at sort of, okay, I want to win. And when I focus just on winning, that can lead to a lot of negative outcomes. It can make me feel very anxious if I'm just focused on winning. Whereas when I focus on processes that I can control, so again, staying calm. Well, if I've learned some of the tools and techniques that we talk about in this book, I can perform a little bit more calmly. That helps me achieve a better level of performance, which ultimately gives me the best chance of achieving the outcome that I want. So what we generally advise anyone, whether it's an athlete or an individual in a different performance context, is focus on those kind of processes, focus on the tools and the techniques and the strategies that will help you perform at your best, because it gives you the best chance of achieving the outcome that you want. And so when we talk about setting goals, yes, we have our outcome goals. Yes, we have our performance goals, and they're good for motivation. They're good to direct my training. But when it comes to the performance situation, when it comes to competing, setting and focusing on those process goals is really, really one way to get the best out of your performance.
To get the best out of my performance, I have to let our audience know what station they're listening to. So at this point in the show, I tell our audience that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Our guests today are Noel Brick and Scott Douglas. They are the authors of the book, The Genius of Athletes: What World-Class Competitors Know That Can Change Your Life. And gentlemen, I'm going to ask you, one, where we can get the book, and if there's a website where we can get more information.
So the book is available anywhere that you could buy books online. There's a lot more information about the book on the website of our publisher. The Experiment is the name of the publisher, and their website is theexperimentpublishing.com.
And we'll give that information later on in the show. And for anybody, if you did not get anything or if you missed a part of the show, you can always listen to a podcast of the show by going to nccradio.org. That's nccradio.org. And, of course, the book, it's The Secrets of Success is the show, but the book is The Genius of Athletes. Now, in your book, there's a word, and we talked about it before the show. I always like new terms, and this is new to me. Chunking, chunking. What does that mean?
So it's actually a nice lead on from what we're saying about goals.
Yeah.
So chunking is a way of mentally breaking down a bigger challenge or maybe a bigger goal into literally smaller or more manageable chunks. So we take an example of running a marathon, and this is one of the examples that we give the book. I mean, for anybody, be you an experienced Olympian or running your first marathon, the thought of running for 26 miles can feel overwhelming at the start. And what we've learned from speaking with some of the best athletes is that's exactly what they don't do at the start line. They don't think that they've got 26 miles still to go. They chunk it down or they break it down. So they'll maybe just focus on the first 5 miles and getting to the 5 mile point, or even just during a really tough part of the race, breaking it down to get to that next lamppost that I see ahead, or get to that next turn that I see ahead. And the reason why that's so useful is, you know, when we kind of think that we've such a long way to go, like 26 miles to go from the start line, it can be overwhelming. It can almost make us feel like turning around before we even start the event. Whereas when we chunk it down, when we break it down into those smaller, more manageable chunks, it makes it a little bit easier. It's less of an overwhelming task. And what we find from the best athletes is that's how they manage those really difficult events. So whether it's a marathon, whether it's a really tough interval session for a runner, whether it's, you know, I work a lot with field sport athletes where they're maybe sort of performing for 15 minutes or an hour or whatever it might be. But we do the same thing. We break it down into next moment, next minute, and really just focusing and staying in that moment. And once you get past that next moment, deal with the next one and deal with the next one. And ultimately, when you do that, you'll get to the finish line. But it's an easier way to manage what might be an overwhelming proposition.
And I know you point out in the book that, and you use the expression ink it, I-N-K, ink, like the ink in a pen. But why is ink it or writing it down so important?
So it's a really useful way of, I suppose, one, reminding yourself of in one way your goals. So sometimes when we work with athletes and we're talking about goals, be it outcome, performance, and process, writing it down is one really useful way of reminding you of your goal. I take that a number of different ways with athletes, even going back to what we were talking about in terms of processes. So having different strategies like chunking. as a process that will help you through a difficult task. Writing those down, writing down what I will do when it gets tough, writing down my strategy. And that's what we mean by ink it. Sometimes putting it in paper makes it a bit more memorable, because when you really need it, when you're in that challenging moment, having it written down, having it more memorable helps you to engage that strategy when it's most useful.
And in your research, this is what the top athletes really do. This isn't something you're just saying would be good for people. Am I correct? You've actually talked to them, and I know you mentioned some names in your book. They actually do this because there's so much on the line. The difference between, for a golfer, first and second place can be $500,000, $1 million, or even more in terms of dollars. And that's more than most of us will earn in 10 or 12 or 15 years.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, I've interviewed a lot of athletes in my research, and Scott interviewed quite a few for this book as well. And, so many common themes when you speak to athletes. And sometimes, my research, so a lot of my research is with runners. And, my opening question very often is, what do you think about when you run? It's probably one of the most common questions I get asked as a runner as well. But, sometimes 60 minutes later, they're still telling you about the things that they think about, how they talk to themselves, how they deal with really challenging moments, how they stay calm, how they stay focused, how they stay relaxed. So these are all strategies. I think sometimes when we watch sports as a fan, we don't really always see what goes on under the hood. And by that, I mean, we don't see what athletes are doing to keep themselves calm, to keep themselves focused. We give one example in the book, which is a really nice example of American footballers who are caught on video speaking out loud and verbalizing what they would normally say quietly in their own heads. And it's a really nice example of simply just, before a play starts, just saying to themselves, set or focus or whatever it might be, having trigger words like that reminds them how they want to be in that next play or what they want to do in that next play. And this is just one example, speaking to themselves of various strategies athletes use just to help them through those moments. A common misconception might be that, the very best athletes, when the pressure is really on, are just really calm, really focused and not thinking. Well, they are. They might feel just as nervous as I might, but they've got a strategy to deal with it. They might have as many distractions going on around them, but they've got a way of dealing with it. They might have negative thoughts going on like we all experience, but they have a way of dealing with it. And that's where these strategies become really useful.
Now, you have something in your book, and you say the top athletes have and prepare for, and the term is what if, 2 words, what if moments. And I know you talk about Michael Phelps, and there's some things in there that I certainly would never even think of, and yet his coach made him prepare for them. So can you tell our audience something about that? Yeah,
so this is one really nice story to kind of introduce this what if strategy and how it can be useful. So it's a story of how in one of his Olympic finals, I think it was the 200 meter butterfly final, Michael Phelps, I'll kind of tell what happened, and then I'll sort of relay how he prepared for it. So during the 200 meter butterfly, when Phelps dived into the pool, he very quickly realized that he had a leak in his goggles. And as the 4 laps of the race went on, the water started to fill up. And for a swimmer, I think, first of all, how would I deal with that if that happened to me in the moment in an Olympic final, in one of the most important races of my life? And I think most of us would kind of reply to that question with panic, stop, which obviously as an Olympic level swimmer or any level, that's the last thing you would want to do, because literally you're swimming in the blind and you can't see where you are in the pool. And for a swimmer, that's really important to know when to turn to swim the next lap. But with his coach, Phelps had prepared for any scenario like this that could happen. And they sort of developed a scenario that if an event happened in the pool, then he would have some way of dealing with it. And this is our what if strategy. If something happens, then this is what I'm going to do. And what they practiced as part of training was that unexpectedly, sometimes Phelps' coach would switch the lights off in the swimming pool hall, so that, again, Phelps was literally swimming, unable to see what was happening around him. And what he learned to do in that situation was to stay calm, to stay focused, and to know where he was in the pool. He would start counting his strokes. And he knew that for him, it was 21 strokes to swim a length of the pool. So going back to the Olympic final, when his goggles started to fill and it got to a point on the last lap where he couldn't see where he was in the pool, he started to count. And as he got to 17, 18, 19, he's probably going much faster than that, but 20, On 21, he reached out for the wall, touched the wall, and actually not just won Olympic gold, but actually broke the world record in that race as well.
And if I'm correct, I'm sorry to interrupt, but to a swimmer, 100th of a second can be the difference of a race. And of course, 100th of a second, 700ths of a second. So getting upset over something like leaky goggles or the lights going out can make the big difference. Just if you go right through that, your other swimmers are probably losing 1 or 2 or 3 hundredths of a second. Makes you the winner right there.
Exactly. And you think the small margins, as you say, to not just to win a race, to break a world record. Now, if you take that 100th of a second and you think, okay, if I hadn't prepared for that moment, how long would it take me to figure out a strategy to deal with what was happening to my goggles? Probably, much, much longer than that. So this is kind of the secret and the benefit of preparing for events like that and having some sort of strategy planned. So if this happens, and some challenges are predictable. If, for example, I'm giving a presentation and my slides don't work, which can be a very triggering situation, and I might start to panic. Okay, it's maybe predictable that might happen. What will I do? So the what if is the if situation, and the then is what I'll do if that happens. And that might be just very simply a bit like Phelps' strategy. What will I do to keep myself calm? And that might be taking a deep breath, or it might be something I say to myself just to give myself time to think and to deal with the situation. And what the research shows with if-then planning is that when we have a plan for dealing with difficult situations prepared before the event, we respond much faster because, again, it's already there. We don't have to think on our feet. The thinking has been done before the event. And that's really what happened in the Phelps situation. He responded very calmly, very quickly. And as you pointed out, where fractions of a second make a difference, clearly in that situation, it worked for him.
And I've heard about that with golfers who have people screaming in the background and tennis players so that nothing bothers them when they get in the real match, because those things do happen. You mentioned strategy, and my strategy is to always let our audience know who they're listening to. So at this point in the show, I'm going to remind our audience that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guests today are Noel Brick and Scott Douglas. They are the authors of The Genius of Athletes. And gentlemen, would you tell us again where we can get the book, and if there's a website we can find out more?
Sure. The book is available anywhere you could buy any excellent book. And the publisher's website is theexperimentpublishing.com.
Now, we always hear about habits and learning a new habit for an athlete, et cetera, whether it's taking the shot correctly or, I guess, making the swimming stroke or the way to start for a runner. What is it about habits and triggers? You use that word. Where do they come together, and what should we know? Because I think we were always told that it takes 21 days for a new habit to form, whether we're on a diet or something. Is that correct, or is there new information?
Yeah, so tackling that 21 days, first of all, which is a myth when it comes to habit formation. Reason being that it really depends on the behavior. Some behaviors we learn and form habits from very, very quickly. So, a very simple behavior might be having some water with your lunch or sort of drinking water through the day. It's a very simple behavior. There's not a lot of steps involved in that behavior versus doing something like taking up a new exercise regime where there's lots of steps involved. I've got to get the right gear. I've got to put that whether it's my shoes or my clothes or whatever, I've got to get that on. I've got to maybe take out a gym membership. I've got to travel to the gym. I've got to learn new. So there's lots of steps involved, and more complex behaviors like that can actually take not far more than 21 days, sometimes hundreds of days to make a habit from. So that idea of 21 days for any behavior is a myth. But going back to what you said about triggers, so what is a habit? First of all, a habit is something that's usually triggered by something in our environment. So for example, again, I used my example of drinking water. Usually the trigger for me to have some water is seeing the glass sitting beside me, or usually I carry a bottle around with me all day. And when I see it, that's the trigger to have some water. And most behaviors that we sort of look at are triggered by external events when they become habits. So two ways that we can look at that. First of all, if you're trying to change a habit, one of the things that's really useful to do is identify, okay, what in my environment is triggering that habit? What's making me engage in that behavior? And again, there's lots of usually health-related behaviors that we try to change. So it could be giving up smoking, for example, is a common one. It could be giving up certain foods, whatever it might be. So that's one of the first steps, identifying the triggers in your environment. Equally, if you're trying to develop a new habit, what's really good to do is to pair something in your environment that will trigger, that will remind you to engage in that habit behavior. So again, if it's something simple like drinking water, it's a reminder to always carry your water bottle with you, something that will remind you to do that. Going back to if-then planning, this is actually a really useful way as well to start the process of developing new habits. So again, if-then planning, I mentioned that when we sort of pair two things together, if this happens, then this is what I'm going to do. Well, really what we're doing there is pairing a trigger with a response. And that's a really nice way to start the process of developing a habit, or a better habit, a better way of responding to things, rather than maybe an old habit of kind of, so again, if something unexpected happens and my usual response to that is start to panic or to worry or to whatever it might be. Well, then starting off with that, if this happens, then this is what I'm going to do. And repeating that over time helps the initial steps of forming that new habit behavior.
You've definitely given us some good information. Now, to our audience and for any of us, what would be the first step as a last question today? And we've got about 30 seconds. What would be the first part of your book that you would take on if you're an athlete? And we'll use running because you mentioned you do that.
If it were me, I would read about learning how to talk to yourself in a positive manner to best navigate challenging situations.
I like that. Noel, do you agree?
And a second one for me would be learning some of the strategies that we have to manage our emotions, like, for example, staying calm when you're doing podcast interviews. That would be one that I would definitely take forward.
There you go. You've given us the tips. They work in real life. They work for runners. They work for golfers, and they'll make us all better as athletes. We want to thank you for being with us today and would like to remind our audience that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at this same time when we will revisit our secrets to success.